Fairview, Pennsylvania, a town where nothing ever happens, a place of manicured lawns, weekend barbecues, and friendly neighbors. But on October 4th, 2001, all of that changed. At exactly 5:47 p.m., a 911 call came through to Fairview County Dispatch. A teenage boy's voice, breathless, shaking, trying to tell the dispatcher to send for help. The dispatcher tried to keep him calm, asking for details. His voice was still shaking, but the dispatcher could still make out some words. "She's on the floor, and there's blood. She won't wake up." And then, silence. Within minutes, Fairview Police Department officers were en route to 132 Willowbrook Lane. It was a quiet, affluent neighborhood, the kind where people left their doors unlocked at night. But that night, the scene inside the Grayson home told a different story. The first officers on the scene moved cautiously. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken windows, no disturbed furniture. Nothing, at first glance, looked out of the ordinary. Until they reached the kitchen. And there, they found her, Emily Grayson, 38 years old, lying motionless on the cold tile floor, her nightgown stained dark red, her face turned to the side, frozen in terror. Her injuries were brutal. Deep lacerations across her hands, defensive wounds, blunt force trauma to the head, a single precise stab wound to the abdomen. Emily had fought. She had fought desperately, and yet she had lost. As forensic teams moved through the house, the questions began piling up. There was no sign of robbery. None of Emily's valuables had been taken. Her wedding ring remained on her finger. A glass of wine sat untouched on the kitchen counter. The radio still played softly in the background. This wasn't a break-in. This wasn't a random attack. Emily Grayson hadn't been surprised by her killer. She had let them in. Then came the biggest question of all. Where was her husband? Matthew Grayson, 45 years old, a retired military officer, a security consultant, a man known for being disciplined, level-headed, methodical. Yet in the hours following his wife's murder, he had vanished. His phone was off, his car was missing, and his colleagues hadn't seen him since the day before. Had he fled? Or was he another victim? Detectives needed answers, and fast. Because as they dug deeper, they realized Emily had left behind more than just a crime scene. She had left behind a trail that, if followed correctly, would reveal the truth. The murder of Emily Grayson had sent shockwaves through Fairview, Pennsylvania. A loving mother, a respected librarian, a woman with no known enemies. And yet, on the evening of October 4th, 2001, she had been found murdered in her own kitchen. There were no signs of forced entry, no struggle beyond the final moments. Whoever had done this had walked right in. And now, with her husband missing, detectives were left with more questions than answers. Was Matthew Grayson a victim, or was he something much worse? The first 24 hours after a disappearance are crucial, and Matthew Grayson had been missing for more than 12. His cell phone was off, his bank accounts showed no activity, his credit cards remained untouched. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. Then, at 6:42 a.m., just hours after Emily's body was discovered, state troopers found something. A black Dodge Charger, abandoned off Route 33 just outside Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, nearly 60 miles from the Grayson home. The driver's side door was unlocked, the keys were missing, and inside the car, something chilling. The shirt belonged to Matthew, the blood belonged to Emily. Suddenly, Matthew Grayson wasn't just a missing person, he was a prime suspect. While officers searched for Matthew, another team began digging into Emily's life, because the question remained, why was she killed? By all accounts, Emily Grayson had been a model citizen, a loving mother, a respected librarian, a devoted wife. But as detectives sifted through her bank records, phone calls, and emails, they found something unexpected. Emily Grayson had been hiding something. 3 cash withdrawals in the past 2 weeks. $4,500 in total, a call to a family law attorney 3 days before her murder, and a private investigator's business card tucked away in her purse. Emily had been preparing for something. Was it divorce? Was it a plan to leave? And more importantly, had someone found out? Detectives wasted no time tracking down Adam Whitaker, the private investigator whose card was found in Emily's belongings. They needed to know, why had Emily hired him? Whitaker didn't hesitate. She thought her husband was hiding something, he said. She asked me to watch him. According to Whitaker, Emily had suspected Matthew of having an affair. For the past 3 weeks, Whitaker had been following Matthew, documenting his movements. What he found was disturbing. Matthew had been withdrawing large amounts of cash, meeting with an unidentified woman in secluded locations, making frequent phone calls to an unknown number. And then, on October 3rd, the night before Emily's murder, Whitaker received a voicemail from her. Her voice was shaken, urgent. "I think I finally know what's going on. I need to talk. Please call me back." But by the time Whitaker called, it was too late. Emily Grayson was already dead. With Matthew Grayson still missing, detectives turned their focus to the woman he had been meeting. She had appeared in surveillance footage 3 times. Always at night, always in isolated locations, but her identity remained unknown. Until investigators traced the license plate of the car she was seen driving, the registration led to a name: Samantha Blake, Emily's best friend. Samantha Blake was brought in for questioning on the evening of October 5th. At first, she was cooperative. She admitted she had been meeting with Matthew, but she insisted it wasn't an affair. It wasn't like that, she said. Emily had it all wrong. According to Samantha, Matthew had been confiding in her because he felt like his wife didn't trust him anymore. He had sensed something was wrong. He told Samantha that Emily had been acting differently. She had started withdrawing money, making strange phone calls, meeting with someone in secret. She wouldn't tell me what was going on, Matthew had told Samantha. He had been afraid Emily was planning to leave him. And, Samantha said, he wasn't wrong. Detectives leaned in. "What do you mean?" Samantha hesitated. Emily had made up her mind, she admitted. She was planning to leave him. Matthew had feared losing his family. And now he was gone. Had he run away? Or had something happened to him? Matthew Grayson was still missing. Was he on the run? Or was he already dead? His car had been found abandoned nearly 60 miles from the crime scene. Inside, a blood-stained shirt. The blood? Emily's. Suddenly, Matthew wasn't just a missing person. He was the prime suspect. With each passing hour, the likelihood of finding him alive dwindled. And then, detectives received their first real break. A witness. Someone had seen Matthew Grayson, and what they had to say would change everything. At 10:12 p.m., nearly 5 hours after Emily's body was found, a gas station attendant on Route 22 reported something strange. A man, disheveled, breathing hard, had entered the store. He wasn't wearing shoes. His clothes were torn, stained. He purchased only one thing, a bottle of water, paid in cash, and then he disappeared into the night. When police showed the attendant a photograph of Matthew Grayson, his answer was immediate. Yes, that's him. But if Matthew Grayson had been on the run, why didn't he take his car? Why abandon his vehicle and travel on foot? It didn't make sense. Unless Matthew wasn't running away, he was running from someone. The gas station sighting gave investigators a direction. They followed Matthew's last known movements, checking security footage from nearby hotels and motels. And then, at 11:23 p.m., they found something. A motel registration log. Room 18, checked in under a false name. But the driver's license number used for the booking, it belonged to Matthew Grayson. But Matthew Grayson was nowhere to be found. And on the floor, something disturbing. His wallet, his watch, and most chilling of all, his phone. Matthew Grayson had left everything behind. Had he been taken? Had he met with someone? Or had he simply walked away for good? As detectives searched for Matthew, forensic teams were still combing through the scene of Emily's murder. At first, nothing new stood out. The kitchen was pristine aside from the struggle. No fingerprints that didn't belong, no unknown DNA. But then, under ultraviolet light, they found something strange. On the dining room table, the faint outline of two wine glasses. One washed clean, the other Emily's. Still full. Emily had been expecting someone. She had poured them a drink. But why was only one glass cleaned? Had the killer wiped it down? Or had someone else been there and left? Then something unexpected. A call from Emily's phone, dialed at 5:14 p.m., just minutes before she died. And the number? It belonged to Samantha Blake. Samantha Blake had already told police she had nothing to do with Emily's murder. She admitted she had been meeting with Matthew, but when detectives showed her the phone records, her reaction shifted. They pressed her. Why was Emily calling you minutes before she was killed? Samantha hesitated. I don't know. A beat of silence. Then she looked away. I didn't answer. Why not? I was with Matthew. Detectives leaned in. Where? Samantha took a slow breath. At the motel? Matthew Grayson hadn't just disappeared. He had been waiting for someone. And that someone was Samantha. He told me he needed to leave town, that he was scared. Scared of what? That someone was going to kill him. Matthew Grayson hadn't been running. He had been hiding. And now, he was gone. Matthew Grayson had been missing for 2 days. His wife was dead, his car was abandoned, and now, new evidence suggested he had been hiding, not running. But hiding from who? The case was no longer just about solving a murder. Now detectives were racing against time. Because if Matthew Grayson had been afraid for his life, was he still out there? Or had the same person who killed his wife already gotten to him? The search for Matthew Grayson intensified. With the gas station sighting and the motel check-in, investigators knew his last known movements. He had been alive after Emily's murder. He had been scared, desperate, and then he was gone. At 4:57 a.m., a state trooper patrolling Route 19 noticed something odd near a wooded rest area. A set of tire tracks, fresh, leading off the pavement into the trees. The officer followed the tracks slowly. Then he saw it. A silver sedan, its engine off, its driver's side door open. The car belonged to Matthew Grayson. But there was no sign of Matthew, only a dark red smear on the ground. Blood. A single item lay on the passenger seat, a folded piece of paper. When detectives opened it, they found one line written in blue ink. A name. Eric Nolan. Who was Eric Nolan, and why was his name the only thing Matthew left behind? Eric Nolan was a private security contractor, a former military specialist who had spent years working in private intelligence, and, more importantly, he had been one of Matthew Grayson's closest associates. Matthew and Eric had worked together for years. They had been business partners. But something had changed. Something had driven a wedge between them. And now, Matthew was missing. Had he gone to Nolan for help? Or had Nolan been the one chasing him? Samantha Blake had already told police she had been with Matthew the night Emily died, that he had been paranoid, afraid. But now, detectives had new questions, because the name Eric Nolan had come up, and Samantha's reaction was immediate. She stiffened. Her eyes darted away. Detectives leaned in. "Do you know Eric Nolan?" Samantha hesitated. Yes. How? She swallowed hard. He used to work with Matthew. And? A beat of silence. Then, whoo, she exhaled. And Emily was afraid of him. She told me something wasn't right, Samantha admitted. She thought Nolan was watching her. Did she say why? Samantha nodded slowly, because she knew something she wasn't supposed to. As detectives dug deeper into Eric Nolan, they found something disturbing. A money trail, $15,000 withdrawn from a business account, cash deposits made in small increments over 3 months, a direct connection to Matthew Grayson's missing funds. Eric Nolan had been moving money, and Emily had found out. Emily had discovered something, and then she was dead. On the morning of October 7th, detectives arrived at Eric Nolan's office. They had questions. But Nolan had already left town. His office emptied overnight. His home vacant. Eric Nolan had disappeared. Now, detectives weren't just looking for Matthew Grayson. They were looking for a ghost. Matthew Grayson was still missing, and now so was Eric Nolan, a former military specialist, a security contractor, a man with a history of secrecy, and possibly a killer. The investigation had entered dangerous territory, because now detectives weren't just searching for a missing man. They were searching for a man who didn't want to be found. While officers searched for Matthew and Nolan, a new team focused on the money, because every crime has a financial footprint. And what they found was disturbing. $250,000 funneled through offshore accounts, untraceable cash withdrawals from different ATMs, multiple shell companies, fake businesses, connected to Nolan's name. Eric Nolan had been hiding money for years, and Emily Grayson had found out. Emily had been planning to expose Nolan, but before she could, she was dead. Then, on the evening of October 7th, police received a phone call. The voice on the other end was shaky, barely above a whisper. "I think I found him." Detectives leaned forward. "Who?" "Matthew Grayson." The caller was a station clerk at a bus terminal in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. A man had walked in, disoriented, mumbling to himself. He had no luggage, no ID, only one thing in his pocket, a room key for a motel. In Harrisburg, detectives raced to the station. If Matthew was alive, he could finally tell them the truth. When officers arrived at the bus terminal, they found Matthew Grayson sitting alone on a bench. His face was bruised. His hands were shaking. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. When detectives approached, he didn't resist. He simply looked up, and then he started to cry. For the first time since his wife's murder, Matthew Grayson was finally ready to talk. Matthew took a deep breath, and then he told them everything. He had never killed Emily, but he had known something was coming, because Emily had found out the truth, She had been digging into Nolan's finances. She had discovered irregularities, missing money, and worse, government contracts that didn't exist. Emily had told Matthew everything. She had planned to expose Nolan. And Matthew? He had tried to convince her not to. I told her to leave it alone. I told her he wasn't someone to mess with. But Emily wouldn't listen. The night before she died, she had told Matthew she was going to the police. And then what happened? Matthew's voice cracked. She never got the chance. Nolan had found out. And just like that, Emily was gone. With Matthew's testimony, police finally had what they needed. They weren't just searching for Nolan anymore. They were hunting him. And then, at 5:34 a.m. on October 8th, they found him. A private airstrip, a chartered plane, and inside the hangar, Eric Nolan. The hunt for Eric Nolan had come to an end. For days he had evaded capture. For days he had stayed one step ahead. But now, police had him cornered. Inside the hangar sat a private jet, its engines warming up. A single duffel bag packed with cash. Fake passports ready to go. Eric Nolan had been seconds away from disappearing forever. But he was too late. And now, he would have to answer for what he had done. For hours, Nolan refused to speak. He sat in silence, unmoved, unbothered, an unshakable mountain, until detectives laid out the evidence. The fraudulent contracts, the offshore bank accounts, Emily's financial research proving she had discovered the truth. Then, the murder weapon, a knife, recovered from a riverbank outside Fairview, its handle wiped clean. But forensic testing revealed a faint trace of blood, Emily's blood, and for the first time Nolan's expression changed. A flicker, a split second of recognition. Detectives pressed him. Emily knew what you were doing. She was going to expose you. You couldn't let that happen. A beat of silence. Then, Nolan smiled. Emily Grayson knew she was in danger. She had spent weeks gathering evidence, weeks connecting the dots. And on the night of October 4th, she had made her decision. She was going to the police. But she never got the chance, because someone else had arrived first. Eric Nolan had been watching her. He knew she was a risk, so he took care of it. Emily Grayson had been silenced. "You think I killed her?" He shook his head. "You're looking in the wrong place." A pause. "I didn't do it alone." Detectives stared. Then, the realization. Matthew had been running, not from the police, but from the truth. "Matthew, tell us what happened." Matthew Grayson had been hiding something all along. Yes, Nolan had ordered the murder, but Matthew had let it happen. He had known what Nolan was capable of. Emily had told him everything, begged him to help her, but Matthew had been weak. He had been afraid. So he had done nothing. I should have stopped it. In April 2002, Eric Nolan was convicted of first-degree murder, sentenced to life in prison without parole. Matthew Grayson was convicted of conspiracy to commit murder, sentenced to 25 years. Justice had been served. But the damage had already been done. Emily Grayson had been a wife, a mother, a friend. She had been a woman who wanted to do the right thing, but in the end she had been surrounded by betrayal. Her husband had abandoned her, her best friend had ignored her call, and a man she barely knew had decided she was expendable.